how I potential new trainer is I always have my team get to interview that candidate because at the end of the day, you're gonna work with team, right? Even though like I have to make a final call, but I don't make that final call until I get Robert, Jeremy, and my other companions because that's what it's about, right? They have good insights that they can have questions also. Give you also a different perspective as well.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for joining. We got a relatively full house in here today. Thank you guys very much. We will get started here in maybe just a couple of moments. I'm going to refresh my screen share, make sure I'm feeling good. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We can start putting some eyes on it. Like I said, we do have a relatively full house here, so we'll kind of go on the first come, first serve basis. If you did pre-submit a question, feel free to say, hey, I pre-submitted one, and I'll make sure I can find it. But like I said, um, if you have a question or you're trying to learn something about something specific, there's a chat, there's a QA. People are already popping them in there. Thank you very much. And we'll get started here in just a few moments. And again, thank you guys very much for joining. My name is Robert. I'll add my name onto my title. Like I said, I see some already popping up, so thank you very much. Pre-submitted. Thank you. I'll pull this up, make sure I get you on there.
And you put me really joking.
Well, I said hi to you at the tire shop and you ignored me, so your dad to make it. I was like, hey man, good morning, happy Sunday. Hey.
Oh, yeah, so they really tricked.
If you, so Helmet, I found yours. Thank you very much. And like I said, anybody else, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll get started here in about, I don't know, 1 minute, 12:05. I'm just going to confirm I'm sending it back to you just to make sure that we are all on the same page here. That's the question, right? Make sure it's not an old one or there's not some iteration. Cool. Thank you. All right. So we got another one about global debugger. If you update a function. All right, and while we're getting started here, just because we do have a number of new names in here, and thank you guys for joining. On the top right is like a YouTube QR code. I know you can't really scan a QR code from your computer, but if you go to YouTube and type in decisions support, we do post all of these lunch and learns as well as content from these lunch and learns. As well as on the bottom right, we have this decision solutions marketplace. Which is kind of pre-built out accelerators. I'll kind of show you that here in just a moment. But stuff that you can download and import into your instance to see how things are built out or to kind of reduce some of that friction to deployment. So I'll kind of start talking about some of that stuff right now. Close other tabs. So yeah, like we have, we'll start with the YouTube. Just again, if you can't find it, I know you can't scan a QR code from your computer, but if you type in decision support, we have a channel, decision support channel. And we post all the lunch and learns as well as videos around commonly asked questions like data structures, dependencies in V9, data structure deep dive, data modeling, project conversion, things along those lines. Just stuff that we get commonly asked. When it comes to the Decision Solutions Marketplace, when it comes to the Decision Solutions Marketplace, again, if you can't scan the QR code because you're on a computer, if you just Google it, it will show up. And we have some pre-built out applications and what we call accelerators, which will help get you building and reduce that friction to deployment. So if you know that you're going to be utilizing, um, let's say a dynamic questionnaire, it will come with rules, flows, rules, forms, workflows, dashboards, things along those lines to help get your process started so you can download and put it into your instance. As well as we do have, I guess we have events going on all the time. So we have three coming on right now, two in the US and um, two in the US and one in Singapore. So we have one in September here in Virginia Beach, one in November here in Virginia Beach, and then one in October for Singapore. So these are events. We have a fundamentals class and a masterclass class. But they are free events. So you just got to get yourself here and host yourself. But going to the event is free and we do feed you. So that'll save you a little bit of money. Okay, and then we're getting a QR code question. Okay, cool. So I've got three questions right now. I think we're gonna have maybe Jared pop in and help with the flow execution extension question. But we'll get started with that one. So I'm kind of taking them in the order they came. So far I've got three. And again, if you're just joining, feel free to throw a question in the chat, or if you're just here to learn, that's fine too. So the first question, I'll kind of put it in the chat for everybody, just so you can read the context, but it's pretty straightforward. But I will allow you to speak because I think that's always the best. Helmet, I'll unlock it. So the question is, if you update a flow execution extension data structure or table using the query editor or a raw SQL step, does that update information in the flow execution extensions process folder by default? Or is the table of the data structure persistent while the process data is not necessarily? So again, we'll kind of just start talking here. I'll put this in the host and panelists. Some other hosts can hear it. So can you, Helmut, I know that was fairly thorough. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what you're trying to do?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we have an application where you can input employee information that gets saved into a process folder. And then later down the line, admins can come in and associate certificates with that employee, right? This is for like access credentialing and stuff like that. We built the application. It works for those functionalities just fine. And then later on, they came to us and said that, hey, the employee data that's being read from our corporate directory, we want to make sure that if somebody's name change or their department changes or their business unit changes, that information that got stored about them in this access credentialing software, is updated accordingly, right? Because it needs to be up to the day for access credentialing. And so we had a developer go in, and what she did was she built a raw SQL data step that kind of would run on a scheduled flow and basically would update that that data structure from the SQL side of things with the query editor, right? But what I've found now is that I can get it to behave where I can make changes and do updates to the row of data on the table, right, using the query editor, but then that data doesn't get reflected in that row's flow execution extension data process folder. And so I just wanted to see if there's an inherent disconnect between those two, versions of the data, or if they're supposed to be the same or what.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. No, so both this is where it brings it to like a little bit of like how the decisions is set up. There is something that we call the ORM layer, which just stands for Object Relational Mapper. But what it does is when you launch the decision system, any change that you make from a perspective in the tool will then go through that layer and then make its way to the database, right? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So how does this relate to your question? It relates to your question because when you just go ahead and query the database directly, you circumvent that layer, the
Mhm.
ORM path that does the connection between the database and the application. And
Mhm.
so that's why you just have it updated in the database and not in the application as
As I
well.
noticed, yeah.
Exactly.
So
So to
you'd
make
have
it,
to
go ahead.
open it up using the process, the update process folder, or update flow execution extension steps, right? You'll use those
Correct.
ORM steps to actually make the change in the process folder.
Correct, exactly.
Gotcha.
And if you do that, then that goes through that kind of like the process of the application ORM
Right.
database. And then you'll have congruency in the data where when you make it here, it will be reflected in the
Okay.
application side.
Yeah, that was my intuition, but I'm glad I could confirm that with y'all.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's an easy answer to my question.
Well, thank you, Jared.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
for the
you.
good question. Yeah, I'm learning too. I guess while we're here, the next question we have, thank you guys again for all the questions. It's nice. I've been having no questions the last couple sessions. So, global debugger, can you save the session to review later? Let's see what we can do here. Um, let's see what options we have. Jared, do you know if there's a way to save the global debugger outside of some type of log in an efficient way? Preserve data in minutes. That's probably not a good option for you. What do you I'm gonna unmute on your end. So we're kind of talking about retrieving sessions from the global debugger. Jeff, can you tell me about what your use case is? You just want to be able to reference that data later for a particular reason?
So what we're doing, we have a couple issues that are
Okay.
going. So in our QA environment, when we're doing load testing, every once in a while we see some function that seems to have a performance degradation. So we're trying to hit it with the global debugger
Okay.
test, and it does render a lot of data as far as the tree on the left,
Right.
and it takes some time to review it. So the two issues I'm having is one, our ops team says we have to have a 30-minute timeout on the portal. And
Okay.
what happens there is since the something weird happens, the debugger opens in a new tab separate from the decisions portal.
Correct.
And if you, what I think is happening is if you don't keep active in the main portal window, it'll time you out and close the debugger as well.
Yes.
So,
On the global debugger, like the information from the global debugger side disappears.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that, because it does take a while and it only allows you to preserve the data for up to an hour, I think, on the select. Sometimes it takes longer than an hour and it starts disappearing. So,
Yeah. So I'm not sure. This is a good question. I'm not sure there's a way I can search internally with some of the core devs and see if there's a way to export that data. I don't think there is. I think some workarounds that we could do is if you know where the part of the process where it errors out, we can put a log step there and have it write to the log file and review it there. That would be a way to get that information. Go up there to that part on the preserve data, Robert. This will preserve the cache. Okay, so that's just preserving the cache, like we were just talking about. Stop in. Okay, that just stops it automatically. Okay. Settings. Ignore root entities. Session expired. This will preserve the cache. This setting is the same as preserve data for, which is available. I don't even understand what that means. It's configured for 2 minutes. It will only show debugger activities for the 2 minutes. Can you go back into the environment, Robert? Let's see if we can find that setting. Put the global debugger. Oh, it's that part. Go ahead and print it off because I think that's the part. Yeah, we were just talking about that. And that part doesn't, if you set it for longer,
Yeah.
it still doesn't preserve that data, Jeff.
no, actually, I didn't try the custom.
Okay. I would say try that. Maybe that might help if you have a really long running process for that. Oh, that's cool. Then you can have the stop the timeout. But I believe, yeah, give that a shot. See if that helps. I think that may help with it. But if it doesn't, I know I've had some issues where when I've done it, it still has sometimes behaved where it expired way too early. Now that might have been fixed in newer versions of later versions of 8 and 9, because it's been a while since I've messed with that.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you guys
And,
again.
and then sort of related to that, is there a way in here that you can make it like only like search for like a certain level on the tree, like if you know there's a flow that's suspect, like only log things related to that flow?
Yeah, there's currently in this iteration, I know in future iterations, there's talk about, you can select a variable and you can track that variable through the debugger. And I think that's coming in later versions of 9, but in its current state, there's no way to like just say, hey, I just want to check this flow, and then have everything else filtered out. This just grabs all the flows that run on the system.
Okay.
And you do have some, I haven't poked around with it too much, but you do have some more like global debugging settings down here. If I gotta turn the global debugger off, I guess. But you do have some more settings down here, which again, you might be able to parse down in the way things are grouped. But yeah, besides that, there's no real way in that UI for the global debugger to parse it out.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Cool.
Thanks, so guys.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you guys.
Our
Thank you.
pleasure.
Cool. And the last one, or last one we have pre-submitted. Again, if you have more questions, this is a fully packed house, probably the highest attended lunch and learn we've had in a while. Thank you guys for making the time for it. It's related to the QR code, and it's saying the plan has expired. Nick, do you mind telling us which version? I'm gonna let you talk. Which version you're in, and that error comes up like as an exception, basically. Is that correct? Nick, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I'll mess around with it for a moment, but it's saying the QR code step is erroring out in some capacity here. Maybe it's under image generation, not Q. Yep. Any more insight on that would be nice. Image.
Robert, he's saying it's the QR code on the slide.
Oh, on the slide, not in the platform. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I'll fix it today. Thank you for that. Yeah, I did not notice. I appreciate that.
Do you know
I'll
which one, Nick? Which one was it?
I can test them both.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, it might be. I do know that, um, you know, companies go down. Maybe I got to update it since that CrowdStrike thing, some kind of weird uh, provisioning thing. But I will look at it saying QR code plan has expired. I don't have a plan, so I will look at it. I will look at that. No problem. I thought we were talking about QR codes and decisions. What other questions we got? Like I said, we got a lot of attendees in here, some new faces, new names. What other questions do you guys have for me today? We talked about flow execution extensions, data structures, and circumventing some of that stuff. I submitted a question in the Q&A. Cool, no problem. Let me make sure I already have it pulled up. Let me just find it. In the QA, I already have it pulled up. There it is. Oh, yeah, the QA is actually full. Thank you, guys. I'm going to work through the QA now. Sorry about that. Can you explain how data works in decisions? It just seems to float around and become available possibly before the data was created. So, how does data work in decisions? It just seems to float around before becoming available possibly before the data was created. So, generally speaking, it definitely can be confusing because it depends on where that flow is in kind of the grand scheme of things. Like if you have it in a trigger flow, there are certain things that will pre-populate. But if I just go with like a create data step and a raw flow here, it will be in floater and folder. And I just add this here and I try and pull data. I'll say available data. The only data that I'm going to have available at this point in the flow is the flow data. So flow data will always be there for you. And flow data is going to be related to information from your decisions instance, such as your user, when the flow started, the operating system, things along those lines that are just, I don't want to say housekeeping, but I'll say software housekeeping of just like what you are running and how you are running the flow, but no actual data is available. And then if I add another create data step after this, right? So available data is an output of this, and I'll map in just some a random piece of flow data here. I'll map in my based URL to portal. So then now from here on out, I have this create data step, and or I'll add an actual step here to run some. We'll send an email or something along those lines. So now when I go to from and select from flow, I'll have that available data and flow data because it's downstream from the initial. It's downstream from the initial create data step. Now, where things can get kind of confusing, and you might say things are existing before the data gets created, is as you map in inputs to a flow, I could say, I know that a default input for this flow is going to be, let's say that flow execution extension that I just made, as well as like a date of birth that I'm mapping in from another flow, like if this is a child of a parent flow. Now that date of birth will all be available here because it's coming in kind of constant from the top. So when you prioritize a given input, you can imagine that data is coming from this green start step. And it literally says it over here on the right that it kind of is coming from that. So if it's downstream from that, you'll have those available options. If you're confused about where data is coming from and going, a good way to kind of visualize that people is underutilized is the Data Explorer here on the left. And you'll notice that as I click on the Data Explorer, it'll show me those fields, that flow execution extension, that date of birth, because these are all available data pieces. And as I click on one of these, it will tell me where that data is coming out of, right? Now, some of this stuff is not coming out of anything because we don't have it coming out of anything. But available data is a marked output of this. So if I check a larger flow that's more robust with some more variables, I'm sure I have something built here. And run that Data Explorer, right? As I click on things, I can see where data is coming out of with the arrows on the right and where data is coming in with these arrows on the left. And I can kind of bounce around and say, where is it coming from? So if you find yourself in a position where you're confused about where data is coming from, the Data Explorer is going to be a great option for you in terms of understanding how this data is actually moving around. Steps Explorer is the same kind of concept, but it's just for the different steps that you have in your process. But that's maybe not going to help you as much as the actual Data Explorer would. You can also kind of take this down a step further. So if you have a built-out data structure like the CHS, I can find where those specific fields are being utilized as well. But hopefully that'll give you some insight to that. But generally speaking, with few exceptions, like I said, in a trigger flow or something along those lines, you're almost always going to get your data from an input or from the output of a step, and it's going to run downstream. Again, there are a few exceptions, like in this configuration folder, loan application configuration. You'll notice that up here in one of these triggers, I don't have an input for folder ID. It won't even let me prescribe an input. However, I do have that data folder ID, but that's just kind of part of the architecture of the configuration folder, that it will pass a folder ID through these various flows. So if you're in a configuration folder, yeah, some of that data may seem like it's coming from random places, but that's just kind of the built-in part of that that's built into that trigger flow. Here's extension data. So again, I don't have any inputs here, and you're like, well, why do I have an input in this flow for a loan application? It's because it's built into this configuration folder, and it has that structure kind of built into the flows where you don't have to predefine it as a mapped in input. So again, it depends on where your flow is, but generally speaking, data will always flow downstream. And I'll show you one more example of that. That may help. And then and again, that's an anonymous, it says anonymous, so I can't unmute you to ask for any more clarity. But if you want to say, hey, that's me, I can get any more clarity from you about how you're maybe actually using it. But you'll notice here, I have this divide step as a divide output. If I go and put a multiply step before that, right? If I put a multiply step before that, when I go to select from flow here, I don't have anything downstream. I don't have that divide option. I do have first number and second number coming from my inputs that I described in this flow. But once I have this multiply output, now that I'm downstream from it in divide, I do have that option for the multiply output. So generally speaking, it will always be downstream, but there are a few exceptions depending on where that flow is living based on different data structures. You'll have other options that may seem like the data is coming from nowhere, but if it's without much more context, that's about all I can kind of give you on there. That was great explanation. Yep,
Can I show
thank you.
some stuff, Robert?
Yeah, sure, of course. Please, please, please.
Yeah. All right. Oop. I'm going to share my screen. Everything Robert said, spot on. There's just another thing that I wanted to share that will also be helpful in kind of understanding how data flows and decisions. Another great thing that that Robert showed was the Data Explorer. One thing to always keep in mind is when you're dealing with the Data Explorer, you always want to make sure this is as clean as possible. And by clean, I mean the least amount of stuff as possible. There's many large processes. I think I have one in here where if I go in, I think I have this medical project, and I can go to the flows, create medical staff flow. I got a pretty good size flow, and if I go to Data Explorer, you see I'll have more variables here. And in bigger flows, this is going to be, very large, and it's going to be very hard to find the variables that you want. So that's why we always want to make sure that we build in such a way where we can have a neater Data Explorer. What I mean by that is, let's say I have this example object here, right, in the inputs. I'm going to build data just so you can see what it has, right? It just has two properties that I created called test1 and test2. And so let's say instead of creating all these variables and later on, so let's say this is the update value, right? And then I'm going to save this. Now you have this create data step that has, data, we'll say this is new value, and then this variable name called update value. And as Robert showed, right, you see this here, this is where it comes out of. But many times I don't want to have all these extra variables inside my flow. I just wanted to point back to this object right here. See where I can find my annotation tool. I just wanted to point back to this object right here and not have a new variable created. If that's your situation, then the input mapping, this is where it comes to output mapping, either at the bottom or at the top. So if I just want this to merely update an existing variable, I can just set this to change value and pick the property, or you can use the output mapping editor, and then I can expand that object, and then I can pass this and connect it to test1 or whatever property I want to update. Then when I click OK, as you saw, my variable of the create data set disappeared because now it's not being used to create a new variable with a new value inside of it. All I've told it to do is say, hey, take this value, new value, and put it in this object.test property that I have up at the top. And so this makes the design Data Explorer experience a lot cleaner because now I don't have all these variables in the Data Explorer. I'm just merely referencing a single point object to update as it goes through my process. So that's one thing you want to be thinking about as you build your processes and as you build processes over a centralized object. Just define that object, and then any step that does some calculations or manipulates data, merely use change value on the step and have it redirect back to your object. You can use this in forms, you can use this in flows, and in a lot of other places as well.
Yeah, and I'm not sure this is the perfect analogy for the change value, but one that works for my brain as I'm still kind of getting coming into an already built environment, there's so many data structures and explore new decisions as well. Yeah. And if you're coming into a project that's already built, you're going to have a ton of stuff. My analogy that I use for the change value versus rename, and this is how again, I'm not sure if this is exactly correct in the structural way it works, but change value to me is kind of like if you have a document and you just do save, it'll save on top of that. So you're not going to have multiple documents. But if you have like a Word document and you hit save as and you rename it, now you're going to have 2 documents. So change value to me is like saving on top. It's like hitting, like if you're in Microsoft Word or, a photo editing software and you hit save, it will save on top of the one that you already exist. So you won't have multiple documents, but if you do rename, it'll be like save as, and you can rename it so then you have multiple iterations. But then again, your folder can get kind of crowded really fast the more revisions and records and things you go through, or the more create data steps, or the more variables you add, things along those lines. The more you add to the flow, the bigger that um, view is going to be. But yeah, if you are coming into an environment where there's a million data structures, just the data explorer can be really helpful in figuring out where things go. But it's definitely, it can be hard to wrangle things down at times. Cool. We'll go on to Brent. And thank you guys again. This was very, very nice. It's a nice break to have a lot of questions. So Robert, I have a REST API that gets info and has X amount of pages with X amount of items per page. I need to be able to loop through each page. I've tried everything to get it to loop through each page. Would it be possible to guide me in the right direction? So we have a REST API that gets info that has a certain number of pages. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to kind of see if I can start building something out while if you want to elaborate a little bit. I know I've got an API built on one of these, a REST API, but feel free to kind of fill in some of those gaps if you can.
What gaps you want me to fill, Robert?
Say it again.
So what gaps you want me to fill?
Oh no, I was just if there was anything else while I'm kind of you can.
No, I gotta know how to loop through the each page. That's about it.
So I think we have one in here. And when you use, so we're outputting, what is the structure? It's the structure that your API is outputting. Is it a structure you've built in decisions, or are you mapping it into a structure in decisions, or is it just coming out as like this type of information? Like how did you build your API? Is it connected to a decisions data structure?
I think it's built. I had I forgot how I did it, but it created the data structure itself.
What system are you trying to integrate with?
A lot of questions.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to figure that out. I haven't worked on this project in a long time.
Okay, because the reason why I was asking is certain vendors, to display pages of data, there's a couple ways you have to craft the URL, and you have to look at their what is it? Their documentation. I'm going to share my screen. There's an example
Sure.
that we've done for ours. This is very specific to us. We integrate with an LMS called Docebo, and we have to, via API, get the data so we can put it in decisions for us to do all the fancy stuff. So similar to what you're doing, just different system. And in Docebo specifically, there is a property in the data. If I can find that real quick. It's called, let's see, JSON to serialize data, and then there is this Boolean value in the data called has more data, right? So if you're only getting 500 items per page and you have like 1,500 and you're like, hey, I have to get all of them, there's typically a process that you can have a true or false, check that Boolean, and then if there is more results, then you can have a flow, go through and run. This one is a little bit complicated, just because our use cases, that system is difficult to integrate with. But you can just loop through the next set of data and say, hey, there's more results. Go ahead and get the next series of data from, I don't know, 501 to 1000, and then keep going that way until that Boolean says it has no no more data, and then
Yeah,
it will continue on.
I don't think there's any Boolean. It just has, I have inputs to set items and page. The max is 50 and input for a page number.
Okay. Are you able to input like the next page? How many pages do you have in that?
It's only 11 pages. I mean, right now it's just says page 1, but it just gets page 1.
Is there any way you could find out on the system like how many pages? Because then maybe you can put in that next one like, hey, next iteration, page 2, and then you can check to see if it returns any data, right? So your logic could be, hey, go to page 1. We got is the list that it fetched from the data empty? If it's false, go back, get page 2, and then keep doing that until you get a result where, like, let's say you go to a page that has no data. And then you could say, hey, is this, list of items, is it, empty? And if it's true, then you know you have all the data.
Yeah, there's only 11 total pages.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's the logic that I would try to do, is if you have the page number count or the input that's within the flow data, then you can add that and just increment that. And then check the list information to see if it's empty. And once it is, after you pull like the 12th page, I'm assuming that's,
Yeah.
that's not going to have anything. You'll have an empty list. Then you can say, okay, cool. Now we're going to go ahead and do whatever I need to do with that data, save it, send it to someone, or what have you.
All right. Thank you, guys. What other questions do you guys have? I know we've kind of covered a lot of ground here. Submit a question to QA. Looks like our chat is clear, our QA is clear. We've kind of walked through 4 or 5 different questions. What other questions do you guys have for me? Or how else can I kind of do some exploring before we wrap this up? Because there's a number of people here in the lobby. I haven't asked any questions unless you're just here to learn, which is totally fine as well. Is there anything else I can help any of you folks with? Looks like QA is clear. Chat is clear. All right. So we did about, I don't know, 5 or 6 questions in 40 minutes. So I'll give it about another 60 seconds or so. But like I said, I'll update this QR codes on the landing screen, but you can always search for those terms. But I do appreciate the intel that they have expired in some capacity. But besides that, I think we're going to go ahead and start to wrap this thing up. Can you show some features and reporting? I would love to. Yes. Great. So some features in reporting. So reporting, let's find some data and report over it. So I will create a report here. I'm going to use some broad data. Report. Let's go ahead and do it. So within reporting, you have a handful of options and a handful of views, and then ways that you can show those views to your end user, whether it be on a page or just on the report itself. So rather than picking a data structure that I know doesn't have anything in it, there are built-in structures and decisions that will always run in the background that you can reference. One might be something like assignments. One might be something like accounts, which I'll do for this use case. But if I click it to count data source, you're always going to want to start with your data source. You can add fields. So underneath that, you could say, okay, I want to figure out all of my accounts. And again, this just kind of runs in the background in decisions. I want to figure out what their email address is. I want to figure out, are they active? Things along those lines. I know a lot of these fields are actually blank. User type, I can do that. Cool. So this is a basic report, about as structurally basic as we can get. It just has a source with a couple of fields. Here are some features in reporting. You can filter things out. So you'll notice that as I add fields, I have field filters. So I can filter on, say, hey, I only want emails that end in a certain capacity. I only want user types. So I could say user type equals starts with any of those kind of things, user type filter, and I can say I only want person or a machine, stuff that runs in the background. Or there are other custom filters that you can run based on features like this. as well as SQL-based filters and rule filters, so you can make custom rules. But where I think, if you wanted to, rather than getting your report to be more parsed down, you'll notice that we have this set up as a data view. But if I click to add a different view, I do not have, oh, yeah, you should be. Jeez, I forgot, apologies. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I forgot, Jared took over the screen share. I'll kind of go back a little bit. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So in a report, again, you can add data sources. You'll have a handful of options here. If I get rid of this, you'll see the stuff that is a user-defined field. So I don't have anything in these structures. I've never saved it. I just made it a couple moments ago. But if you were utilizing something in your project that you made, it'd be here under user-defined types. However, there are a number of built-in ones. So account. And again, you can add fields. So I can say, once I select the data source, if I remove this, I can't add any fields because I don't know what I'm looking at. And these data fields will change based on the source. So if I do happen to pick that helmet one, some of these fields will be those test fields that I made when I was making the structure. They were just called test, I believe, or something. Oh, field A, field B, and field C. So I could report on those if I had data saved in them, but I don't, so I'm not going to choose that one. Filters, again, account data source. Filters are here. You can filter based on the fields that are underneath that structure, as well as rules, date ranges, things along those lines. I'll kind of add some of this stuff. User type. We'll go email. Great. So we're just looking at data right now. You'll notice that when I click add, I don't really have a lot of other views I can do. I mean, I can do calendar, text views, things along those lines. But as soon as you start to group your fields, like I can group this user type and put all of my machine accounts together and all of my person accounts together. As soon as I add that grouping, now when I click add, I get a lot more options because it knows what you want to kind of group your charting by. So now that I've done that, I can add a pie chart and say, I want to say this is the user type because that's what I grouped it by. And again, that's my only option for series type is user type because that's the only grouping I have on this report. I can choose to show the title. I can change colors, things along those lines in this realm. More ways to break it down. Legend position, we'll put it in the south and we'll just say, hey, the name is fine. And you'll notice that as I build that out, now I have this view and I can continue to add these if I wanted to. We'll add another one called created on. Oh, I think maybe just created on date, right? I'll go back to the data field. I'll group that as well. And now I can add a chart. Let's say a line chart, maybe. Oh, we'll do a line chart for this one as well. Line chart. And again, you can continue to add fields. But here we have 3 machines and 2 persons based on that grouping. So I can look at it in this report view, which is fine. But generally speaking, most of your end users are going to be looking at information on a dashboard, which is a page. So when I go to a page and create a dashboard for reporting, I can add a report. So I'll just add the generic report viewer here. And I'll pick or create the default report. I'll pick my existing report. And you'll notice here that when I preview it, it's got that data sorted out by type and by date. So we're sorting the machine types, we're sorting the users, and we're sorting it by date as well with these collapsible fields. But another advantage is when you go to report viewer, or apologies, we'll do pie. You can pick that report and run it in the same way. So we have user count type, and it will look fairly similar once we kind of get it titled out. We'll actually have to add it to a folder. But you are given those options as well to view that report or that report in its various capacity. So here under this, I select a report rather than viewing the data. I can just view it as tile, rich text, charts. Let's see if we can add this to a dashboard and see what it starts to look like here. So now that we've done that, I'll make a quick public folder and add this dashboard. There's nothing in this dashboard, so I'll just add it here. Right. And here's that, the initial one. And here's this reporting view. And again, we should be able to change that other one to the top to be a report viewer, but maybe I am misspoken here in version 9. So we'll have to do a little bit of troubleshooting there, but you should be able to get those same reports in that report viewer as well. And you'll notice here as I drag these out and a lot of these reporting options under reports here, charting, you'll get all those drop downs here as well. So even though I did not have, like, let's say I did not have a simple bar in that report, I can still pick or create report and say I want this, and it will tell me which my count is. We'll say bar chart. And it makes a bar chart, even though we did not have it in the report. So even though the report did not have that information, the bar chart does. And kind of as you build out, I'll show you maybe a pre-built out one that's fairly robust. Or I'll start with a couple of them, actually. I'll start with an early one here. You'll notice on some of these, right? Like we have a purchase request structure, and we had these grouped by the requester name so we could chart on it. But we added a state filter to show only loans that have been approved and auto approved. So again, this is just a state filter based on the type, but it will only show those, and that's the kind of the filtering process. As you go through with these item names, you can also change how these look. You can hide them so they're no longer visible. So like if I wanted to group, if I wanted to have a chart based on the grouping of the decision's email, but I didn't want to actually show up on the chart, I just wanted to be able to utilize that grouping to chart on it later, I could turn off is visible, and you still have the option to report on it in terms of a view. Like if I add let's do another pie chart, I still get requester email as an option, even though it's not visible to make that chart from. I can turn it back visible. Again, you can sort them, you can group them. There's lots of options here in reporting, color rules, things along those lines to use like you would do in an Excel color sorting kind of thing. Anything else? No, that's kind of a little bit all over the place, but what other questions do you guys have? Oh, thank you. No, thank you guys. Okay, we'll go ahead. It's 12:50. Like I said, we did 50 minutes, maybe 8 questions, probably my record for most questions in the shortest amount of time. And thanks to Jared, thanks to everybody in the chat. Thank you, Jeremy, for telling me the QA or the screen wasn't shared. And thank you to Nick for saying my QR codes don't work. But I appreciate all you guys. I will catch you tomorrow. Thank you very much.